Charlie Chaplin stands among the glittering crowd at the Ambassador Hotel's Crystal Ballroom, adjusting his white bow tie while wealthy Hollywood elite bid on auction items for the Los Angeles Children's Home. Across the room, a small boy in patched clothing slips through the service entrance, his eyes wide with desperation as he spots the famous comedian. The child approaches cautiously and whispers with trembling voice, "Mr. Chaplin, please help us. They're closing our orphanage and we have nowhere to go." What Charlie does in the next 27 minutes doesn't just change one fundraising event. It transforms his understanding of what success truly means and establishes a lifelong commitment to using his fame as a force for protecting society's most vulnerable members. Ambassador Hotel Crystal Ballroom, Los Angeles, March 8, 1925. Sunday evening, 8:45. The charity gala represents everything glamorous about 1920s Hollywood. Crystal chandeliers casting rainbow light across marble floors. Women in beaded gowns and men in white tie. The gentle clink of champagne glasses mixing with polite conversation about philanthropic causes that allow wealthy attendees to feel virtuous while socializing. Charlie, at 35, is now one of the world's most recognized entertainers. His recent films have earned millions. His United Artists partnership has made him financially independent, and his every public appearance generates newspaper coverage. Tonight's event, organized by the Los Angeles Women's Club, raises money for various children's charities through a silent auction and dinner dance. But Charlie feels increasingly disconnected from these ritualized displays of charity. Growing up in London's workhouses and knowing firsthand what institutional care means for abandoned children, he finds the evening's festive atmosphere strangely inappropriate for addressing genuine suffering. The boy who approaches him is perhaps 8 years old, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seem too old for his face. His clothes are clean, but obviously mended multiple times, and he moves with the careful invisibility that children learn when they don't belong in wealthy spaces. "How did you get in here?" Charlie asks gently, kneeling to bring himself to the child's eye level. "Through the kitchen, sir. I waited until the staff was busy serving dinner. I'm sorry for bothering you, but Mrs. Henderson said you might help us." "Mrs. Henderson?" "She runs our orphanage, the Sunshine Home for Children. She says you understand what it's like for kids like us because you lived in places like ours when you were small." Charlie's chest tightens. The Sunshine Home is a small private orphanage in East Los Angeles that houses about 30 children whose circumstances make them unsuitable for larger state-run institutions. Children who are too old, too sick, too damaged, or simply too numerous for more selective facilities. "What's your name?" "Tommy, sir. Tommy Morrison. I've been at Sunshine Home for 3 years since my parents died in the influenza epidemic." Charlie remembers reading about the Sunshine Home's financial troubles in the Los Angeles Times. The facility, run by a former nurse named Margaret Henderson, operates on donations and the occasional government stipend. With post-war economic pressures and competition from larger charities, smaller institutions like Sunshine Home struggle to survive. "Tommy, what exactly did Mrs. Henderson tell you about tonight?" "She said this fancy party was supposed to help kids like us, but we haven't gotten any money from it. She heard they were talking about closing us down because we don't have enough funds for next month's rent and food. She sent me here because she hoped, maybe if you knew what was really happening, you might do something." Charlie looks around the ballroom at the elaborate decorations, the expensive evening wear, the abundant food and drink. The evening's auction items include artwork, jewelry, and luxury vacations, all donated by wealthy patrons who will bid generously enough to feel philanthropic while recovering their costs through tax deductions. "Tommy, have you eaten today?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Henderson made sure we all had breakfast and lunch before she sent me here. What about dinner? Tommy hesitates. She said there wasn't enough for dinner today, but we'd have extra breakfast tomorrow to make up for it. Charlie feels a familiar anger rising, not the explosive rage of his childhood, but the cold, focused fury that drives him to action when he encounters systemic injustice. Here is a room full of wealthy people congratulating themselves for their generosity toward children, while an actual child stands before them asking for basic necessities. Tommy, I want you to stay close to me for the rest of the evening. Can you do that? Yes, sir. But won't people be angry that I'm here? Let me worry about that. Charlie takes Tommy's hand and walks toward the auction tables, where bid sheets list the evening's luxury items. A 1924 Rolls-Royce Phantom donated by a studio executive currently has bids reaching $3,200. A diamond necklace from a Beverly Hills jeweler shows bids of $1,800. A week-long vacation to the French Riviera has attracted bids totaling $2,400. Charlie studies the numbers, calculating quickly. The total amount being raised through the auction might reach $15,000, a substantial sum that should easily support multiple children's institutions for months. "Excuse me," Charlie says to Mrs. Whitman, the event organizer. "Could you tell me exactly how much of tonight's proceeds will go directly to the Los Angeles Children's Home?" "Oh, Mr. Chaplin, how wonderful that you're taking such interest. Well, after we cover the event costs, the venue, the catering, the music, the decorations, probably about 40% of the gross receipts will go to the actual charity." 40%? What about the other 60%? Well, as I mentioned, there are substantial costs involved in organizing events like this. The Ambassador Hotel charges for the ballroom, the catering company provides all this lovely food and service, we hired a proper orchestra, the decorations alone cost several $100s, plus the Women's Club keeps a small administrative fee to cover our own charitable work throughout the year. Charlie realizes that this $15,000 fundraising effort will probably result in $6,000 reaching children in need, while $9,000 pays for wealthy people to enjoy an expensive evening while feeling virtuous about their charity. "Mrs. Whitman, I'd like to make a direct contribution tonight. May I have a few minutes to address the guests?" "Of course! Everyone would be delighted to hear from you." Charlie guides Tommy to the front of the ballroom as the orchestra finishes their current selection. The room quiets expectantly. Charlie Chaplin rarely makes impromptu speeches at social events. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your generous support of children's charities tonight. I'd like you to meet my friend Tommy Morrison." Murmurs ripple through the crowd as they notice the plainly dressed child beside the famous comedian. Tommy lives at the Sunshine Home for Children in East Los Angeles. It's a small orphanage that houses 30 children who have nowhere else to go. Tommy came here tonight because his home is closing next month due to lack of funds. The murmuring stops. Charlie has the room's complete attention. "I want to share something with you about charity and children. When I was Tommy's age, I lived in institutions similar to his. I know what it means to wonder if you'll have dinner, to worry about where you'll sleep next month, to feel invisible to the people who have power to help you." Charlie pauses, letting his words settle. "Tonight, we're spending approximately $9,000 on this beautiful event in order to raise $6,000 for children. I have a different proposal." He pulls out his personal checkbook. "I'm writing a check for $10,000 directly to the Sunshine Home for Children. This will cover their rent, food, and operating expenses for the next 6 months." Gasps and applause begin. "But more importantly, I'm asking each of you to consider this. Instead of bidding on luxury items at charity auctions, why not write direct checks to the institutions that need help? Instead of spending money on elaborate fundraising events, why not visit these children and see what they actually need?" Tommy looks up at Charlie with amazement. $10,000 represents more money than the Sunshine Home typically receives in an entire year. "Tommy, would you like to tell these nice people what children at your home really need?" Tommy steps forward, his voice small but clear. We need warm clothes for winter. We need books so we can learn to read better. We need medicine when we get sick. And we need people to visit us sometimes so we don't feel forgotten. The ballroom is completely silent. Charlie continues. I grew up believing that wealthy people couldn't see poor children because we lived in different worlds. Tonight, Charlie has crossed that divide to ask for help directly. The question is, what will we do with this opportunity? Without prompting, several guests approach Tommy, introducing themselves and asking about life at the Sunshine Home. Mrs. Cartwright, wife of a railroad executive, writes a check for $2,000 on the spot. Mr. Davidson, a real estate developer, commits to providing winter clothing for all 30 children. But the most significant response comes from Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a pediatrician who has been listening quietly in the back of the room. Mr. Chaplin, I'd like to volunteer my medical services to the Sunshine Home, free of charge, on a regular basis. And I know other doctors who would do the same if they understood the need. As the evening progresses, something unprecedented happens. Instead of a formal auction with competitive bidding on luxury items, the event transforms into a direct giving campaign focused on practical needs of actual children. Mrs. Henderson, who had been waiting anxiously outside the hotel, is brought in to meet potential donors and explain exactly how contributions will be used. The spontaneous fundraising effort generates $23,000 in direct donations, more than any previous Los Angeles charity event. But Charlie realizes that money, while essential, represents only part of what these children need. Charlie, he says as the evening winds down, would you and the other children like me to visit your home sometime? Not for a public event or photographs, but just to spend time together? You would do that? Just to visit? I think I'd enjoy that more than most of the fancy parties I attend. 3 weeks later, Charlie makes the first of what becomes monthly visits to the Sunshine Home. He arrives without publicity, brings no photographers, and spends the afternoon playing games with children, helping with reading lessons, and listening to their stories. These visits teach him more about effective charity than years of formal fundraising events. He learns that children need consistent relationships with caring adults, not just financial support. He discovers that small acts of attention, remembering a child's birthday, asking about their interests, bringing books tailored to individual reading levels, matter as much as large donations. The Sunshine Home becomes Charlie's model for charitable giving. Instead of writing checks to large organizations with substantial administrative costs, he identifies small institutions serving specific populations and provides both financial support and personal attention. Over the following decade, Charlie establishes a network of small facilities serving abandoned children, elderly performers, and immigrants struggling with poverty. He insists on visiting these institutions regularly, not for publicity, but to understand how his contributions are being used. Tommy Morrison, the boy who approached him that night, eventually becomes one of Charlie's first scholarship recipients, attending UCLA and becoming a social worker dedicated to improving institutional care for orphaned children. Years later, when interviewers ask Charlie about his charitable philosophy, he tells the story of Tommy's courage in approaching a celebrity at a fancy party. That night taught me the difference between charity as social performance and charity as response to genuine need. Tommy didn't care about our elegant evening or our expensive clothes. He needed help for his friends and had the courage to ask directly. What's the most important lesson from that experience? That effective charity requires direct contact with the people you're trying to help. You can't understand need from a distance, and you can't solve problems through intermediaries who have never experienced those problems themselves. The 27 minutes Charlie spent with Tommy at the Ambassador Hotel transformed not only his approach to giving, but his understanding of how fame should be used. Instead of charity as social obligation or tax advantage, he learned to see it as opportunity for direct human connection across economic divides. The Crystal Ballroom where they met was renovated in 1960, but Charlie kept a photograph of that evening, not one of the formal publicity shots, but a candid image of him kneeling beside Tommy while other guests listened to a child explain what orphans really need. That photograph remained on his desk as a reminder that true compassion means seeing people as individuals with specific needs rather than abstract causes worthy of generalized concern.